Good afternoon or morning from the West Coast, everyone. My name is Jeremy Goldberg. I'm proud to welcome you to this Next Up Town Hall on marketing. We've got to have an amazing conversation today with some incredible experts and questions and discussions from you all. And here we are, still social distancing, but yet still coming together to talk about how we can make each other better and ultimately appreciate the opportunity for when sports comes back, the role that we're all going to play. And there are hundreds of organizations that are listening today and that'll consume the content. And I couldn't help but think back nostalgically to when I worked in an office instead of relocating to now the woods of Pennsylvania from the Jersey Shore. When in our office, there's this great giant quote from Nelson Mandela. It's been in all of our offices, and you know, many people have heard this, but he's got this great quote about sports where he talks about sports has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It can create hope where there was once only despair. And I think about where we're at as a country right now. And I think there's never been a greater appreciation for what sports has to offer when we don't have it, right? I think I saw a quote from Darren Ravel from ESPN talking about that it felt like the Jordan documentary was like the Super Bowl because everyone was so excited that there was something to get behind and watch again that was connected to sports. You know, I find myself watching a movie like Miracle and feel like I'm watching a hockey game. I get the adrenaline going again, a little bit withdrawal. The NFL draft, I don't even know what I'm going to do. I'm getting the chips and salsa out. I'm ready to go. So we miss the sport. We appreciate that. And at the same time, I think when we think about what we're missing, community, connectivity, joy, sport is going to play such a critical role in bringing that back. And that's certainly true of the people that are leading the most important youth and local sports organizations around the country. So we're excited to have this opportunity to speak to sports leaders. I had a chance to spend some time yesterday with the Sports Business Journal on their podcast, and we talked a lot about the mobilization that is happening through the community through youth sports. And we'll talk about this a little bit more next week. But we've now launched a coalition called the Play Sport Coalition to really encourage Congress and government to make sure that they're paying attention to this industry and really give everyone here a voice and really shaping how the comeback will happen when our society returns back to some sense of normalcy, and more importantly, sports plays that critical role. The topic next week we're going to cover in a next step is about finances, and I want to acknowledge I know how many of these organizations out there are hurting. Many of you were hoping to get loans from the government, and some of you succeeded, but most of you did not. And so we want to continue to provide resources to you around finances. So before we jump into the discussion on marketing, we're going to throw up a really quick poll today that helps us shape that conversation and get ready for that conversation as well, because there was so much interest in understanding how you can be helpful. So one of the things we're curious about is whether you've applied for funding through the CARES Act, and go ahead and answer that question. And this is really important, especially as we're engaging with government. There's now 400 organizations that have signed this letter asking for an $8.5 billion fund. We're helping to lead that steering committee and really trying to make sure that the CARES Act and government assistance is designed for youth and local sports. So the first question is have you applied for funding through the CARES Act? And just go ahead and take one moment to answer that question. And I think that's the only question we're going to ask you today before we get started. So again, have you applied for funding through the CARES Act? Maybe you haven't received funding. If so, congratulations. I know that'll be such a lifeline for your organization. Maybe you've applied and you've rewarded it, but haven't reviewed it. Maybe you've applied, but the bank hasn't given you any information. They're just reviewing your claim. Maybe you're planning to, but haven't gotten around to it. And last but not least, you're not planning on applying at all. So go ahead and answer that question and appreciate your time. For today's conversation, I've referenced Muhammad Ali a lot over the past number of weeks. And one of the things that I found very interesting is I finished this book up, is it seems that Muhammad Ali has a quote for everything. And when we think about marketing and branding, I think he was a one-man branding agency, right? In the way he was able to position himself as a leader and speak to these things. So there's a quote I thought was appropriate for the conversation this week. If they can make penicillin out of moldy bread, they can sure make something out of you. So I'm not sure if that's the best definition of branding, of how penicillin turns into something as essential as moldy bread. But ultimately, when I think about where we're at right now, I think there's such an important role of the storytelling for youth and local sports organizations. First, how you tell your story at a time when people can't play sports is so essential, because you're going to be leaving an impression for everyone to understand what your organization is about, right? One of the definitions I like about brand is something that Jeff Bezos from Amazon said, where he talked about, what do people talk about when you're not in the room? What do they say about your organization? Because that is your brand, right? The sum total of those feelings and ideas. So how do you think about what you stand for right now? How are you telling that story? Because the harsh reality is there are a lot of organizations that may not come back from this. And the organizations that are thinking innovatively, that are getting their story, that are engaging their customers, that are adopting digital technology, those are the organizations that are going to figure out how to survive and thrive through this. So we've got an amazing expert, Jess Greenwood, to lead us in that conversation about brand. I'm excited to get into that. We also have Doug Bernstein, and many of you, he's familiar to many of you. He spoke at NextUp. We talk about a social media guru. So many people are now telling me that they're spending time on their social media platforms, thinking about how to engage youth and families and establish their relevancy. And when we talk about the important role that kids are going to play in youth sports moving forward, even before this crisis, being able to connect and understand how social media works and how to leverage that is important. And Doug Bernstein is probably the best expert we could find to speak to that topic. And he also brings a lot of passion from sports in his role at House of Highlights. And then last but not least, we've got David Goerke. And David is with Augusta Sportswear, but brings a long track record of marketing, whether it's at McDonald's or Major League Baseball or Coca-Cola. And so he's practically translating these ideas that Doug and Jess are talking about in the day-to-day operations of the organizations. And Augusta is an incredible organization that is doing a lot of leadership work in youth sports, as well as being a partner to so many, especially on the apparel side. So we've got a blend of experiences. This is going to be a conversation, so you can use the questions tab on the right-hand side of your GoToWebinar to submit questions, and then I'll be looking at those and then using that to guide the conversation. But again, we want to have you walk away with some really practical ideas about how to take advantage of this opportunity to define who you are, so that when you come out of this, you're thriving and succeeding and helping to lead this sports comeback. So with that, I'm excited to throw it to Jess Greenwood, and I will admit a few things. One is I am biased about RGA, because RGA, the creative agency where Jess is the global CMO, has been an incredible asset to League Apps. We joined the Dodgers and RGA Accelerator about 5 years ago as it relates to thinking about the future of youth sports and our work with professional leagues and teams. And it was an incredible opportunity to work with so many of the talented people at RGA and really began to appreciate why they're one of the top agencies in the entire world and really redefine what an agency is. I also had the good fortune of hearing Jess speak at the Sports Leaders Conference, and I stopped in my tracks because it was one of the most compelling presentations on brand that had every sports owner and sports leader in the room listening to it. So I'm so grateful that you'll be with us today, Jess. And I'll probably start with you with the big question, which is, when I talk about brand strategy, what does that even mean, especially to an audience of youth and sports or local organizers? What should they be thinking about? How should they be thinking about when it comes to brands?
This is amazing. So I love that you've like quoted Muhammad Ali and then given me this incredible like hype up. So I'm like, everything from now, it's going to be all downhill from here, people. I'm sorry about that, but it's lovely to be in touch with you guys, and great to be working with League Apps, because this work is really important, especially now. So the way that we think about brand strategy at RGA is basically a brand is like an organizing set of principles, or like it's a set of values that defines what you do. It's not just about advertising. For years, it was about advertising and used to have a sort of brands were essentially invented by the marketers of cereal packaging and things like that, because they understood that you could charge more money for a cereal box with Tony the Tiger on the front of it than you could for a generic one that just said Frosted Flakes. So the whole idea of branding was invented as an idea to sort of get people to recognize things and understand things and then choose those things at shelf. The way that brand strategy has evolved over time is it's basically now a sort of a plan that enables you to act in everything that you do. So not just in the way that you tell your story, but in the way that you serve your community, the actions that you show up for is essentially a filter for the things that you do in the everyday. So, for example, one of RGA's been working with Nike for 19 years, and Nike's brand mission is to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And the interesting thing about that is it's not we're going to sell sneakers, it's not we're going to sponsor the NFL. We're not going to do any of those kind of different things. It's basically we bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world, and that informs everything that they do. It informs their product, it informs their marketing, it informs their design, it informs how they treat their people, it informs how they engage with their community. So it's basically a higher order. A brand is a higher order statement that encourages you to understand that the thing that you provide is bigger than just the specific set of services that you do. And the interesting thing, listening to Jeremy sort of introduce this, is brand is particularly important right now, because he sort of said something about what happens when sports comes back. And the interesting thing, sports will come back, but brand never goes away. Like your brand mission never goes away. And at this period of time where people are not able to come together and play sports, the brand can still be doing things that deliver on that larger mission. So, I mean, one of the things, you know, if I've been looking at some of your platforms and websites just to understand exactly like how you guys operate, and I understand that there's, you know, in many of the instances, there's a focus not just on the sport that you provide, but also preparing young people for life ahead through the particular sport that you provide. So one of your things could be, a brand statement could be preparing young people's minds and bodies for life through sport. And then at this particular point in time, when you can't get people together, what are the things that you would do to prepare young people's minds and bodies for life through sport? Nike New York's has their own little mission statement, which is supporting the community of New York through sport. So at this point in time, they're doing all sorts of different things that aren't specifically about getting people out of their houses to support the community of New York through sport. So generally speaking, if you think about, we provide soccer training for the people of Bethesda, what is the click up from that? What is the higher order mission, the why of what you're doing that will enable you to be active at this particular point in time? Hopefully that wasn't too rambly and heady. Hopefully it makes sense.
That was great. So one of the things I think it comes back to is as you're saying, defining a higher order purpose that transcends what actually is happening on the field or court at any given moment. What is the process, especially if an organization hasn't taken time to think about that positioning? What is the way that they might define that? What's the questions they might ask themselves, or an exercise they might do to help them start to think about what it is that they should be talking about and how to bring that to life?
Start with the why. Always, like, why do we do the things that we do? Why is it important to you guys to show up every day and do this work? I think it's also, if you understand why you're kind of doing what you're doing, then it will lead you very quickly to a more kind of a sort of emotional and compelling and sort of interesting place. Because and also if you haven't got to an emotional and compelling and interesting place, like, just keep prodding. So for example, RGA is we're a creatively driven company, we're a service driven company, we do lots of different things. And when we originally started defining our brand purpose, we were saying, well, why do we do what we do? And then you have the sort of first stage, which is to make clients happy, to make money, to do all of those different things. And then you keep prodding and why and why and why. And like, the thing that we found is that the intersection of RGA's work is always at the intersection of technology and people. And we're always trying to be a humanizing force on the influences of technology. And that led us to our purpose, which is what we're trying to do is to create a more human future. So to use technologies in very kind of human and empathetic ways in order to drive things forward. And we love that at this point in time because it gives us a sort of a strong point of view on the kind of work, not only that we do want to do, but what we don't want to do as well, because there's a lot of technologies being used in ways that are antithetical right now to the way that people do their work. So it gives us like a very strict filter about the actions that we take, the clients that we choose to take on, the work that we do for those clients, and the work that we do when we're sort of operating for ourselves as well. So I would say start with the why, and then also try and, this is my sort of particular bugbear, try and get it down to as few words as you possibly can, that you can explain it to someone on the street who doesn't work in your industry and they'll get it. So bringing inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world, or supporting the community of New York through sport, is like, I get it, that's great, we're on it. Where brand tends to go off is when you've got like a page-long mission statement that everybody's throwing a sort of different word into. So if your thing is, we are supporting the development of the young people of Bethesda through soccer and other tools, then basically that's a very specific set of things that you can filter down, and it should be something that you can remember. If you put it on a piece of paper and you say, we're supporting the community of New York through sport, then in a week's time, the people that you told should be able to remember, oh yeah, those guys are supporting the community of New York through sport. It has to be like memorable, hooky, short, as few words as you possibly can, and indicate a higher why.
Final quick question. You gave Nike as this great example as a longstanding client of RGA. What are there are different ways that manifest itself? If you think about Nike, they sell shoes and apparel, but then they have like apps, right? And they have amazing commercials, and they do. So I guess part of it is thinking broadly about the application of that brand that doesn't have to be limited to what you might be thinking about your core product, which in this case would be running programs for kids, for example, or leagues for adults.
Yeah, brand is a filter for everything. It's not a filter for advertising. It should be something that's like baked into the core of everything that you do. And I think the thing that there's been this, like I said, there's been this massive evolution over the last few years of branding being less about ads and more about actions, or like a balance between those two things. So, obviously Nike is telling its story, bringing inspiration to every athlete in the world. that's kind of, there's a lot of Nike advertising. It's all about kind of, a lot of it's about product. It's getting that stuff out there. But the inspiration also goes to sort of a much deeper level. So I don't know enough about everybody's kind of political biases, but the work that they did with Colin Kaepernick was a very specific decision that was made to bring inspiration to the community that Nike is interested in serving. So it affects their corporate policy, it affects the way that they design sneakers, it affects the Nike Plus training ecosystem. That's the innovation to everybody in the world. So at the moment, the Nike Plus training app is free for everybody to use because they want to be able to like give everybody access to those things. So then now they're trialing at home. So this is sort of a long way of saying that like it's not just ads, it's actions. So and at this point in time, when you guys are lucky in some ways, I think, because you already have a very specifically defined community that that you're meant to show up for. So there are other brands still trying to figure out like who's our target audience, who do we want to engage, all of that stuff. You know who you want to engage and you know who you want to talk to. So at this point, with the balance of ads and actions, what are the actions that you can take that will enable you to show up for that community at a time where everybody really, really needs it, that will carry you through this kind of particular period of time? And I will also say that there's a lot of data sort of behind this. Don't go quiet. Now is the time where people need you not to go quiet. And there is data that suggests that brands, it doesn't even suggest, it kind of proves that brands that maintain their share of voice, that continue talking to their community through darker times, tend to come out of it much, much, much quicker. Like, so throughout the 2008 recession, some brands took like a sort of sledgehammer to their marketing budgets, didn't say anything, took them significantly longer to recover than the brands that were in market, talking to people, engaging their community during that period of time. So this balance of ads and actions is very, very important, but now it's like extremely, extremely important. Don't go quiet.
Right. It's interesting to think about how this is the best opportunity to confront what your brand stands for. Because if you remove the opportunity to play on the field and you could still stand for something and you could still take actions that are consistent with that vision, and it's the ultimate exercise you would do in a theoretical world in a boardroom where you'd say, well, if you couldn't actually sell technology, what would you do that would still establish who you are as a brand, right? And the league app. So I think it's a fascinating exercise, and I'm eager to kind of bring you back into the overall conversation. And one thing I'll say is if you go to that questions tab, we have one of the top brand marketers in the world and social media experts and marketing execs. So feel free to submit those questions in and we'll put them on the spot. So we talked about actions, and Jess brought this up, which is it's not just about the kind of ads, right? It's the actions. And Doug, one of the things I can't help but think about from your experience as the GM of House of Highlights, where your track record is unbelievable, and it in the sense of your ability to drive growth. I think I had a bio that's outdated for you. This is the best example I could say, which is the last time I think we had you speak, maybe at NextUp, it was like 1.1 million followers, and you grew it to 8 million followers. And I'd up that to today to say to 16.7 million followers on Instagram, and 3.5 million followers on TikTok, and 2.5 million on YouTube. And not to mention the fact that it's not like you're lucky because you've done that when you were at Bleacher Report and when you're the VP of social there. So you part of what I think I'm taking from Jess is it's the story you want to tell through your actions, but you no longer have to run advertisements to tell your story, right? Social media provides an interesting way to have a conversation and tell your story as well. So the first thing is help. I think it'd be helpful to people have an understanding of how is House of Highlights, which is known for highlights around sports and basketball and the NBA. Like how are you managing through this? Are you finding declining engagement? Are you growing, and how? Like what's the secret here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one, thanks Jeremy and League Apps for being able to participate in this call. I'm always excited to talk to everybody today. So it is really interesting. I think when the moment first happened, everybody on the team took a moment and paused and was really concerned about what the future would hold without live sports. House of Highlights is an account primarily built off of basketball highlights, and in particular, NBA highlights. And while we think about NBA highlights going on pause, what we also had to think about was it's not just NBA, it was college basketball with March Madness, but beyond that, it was high school sports, youth sports, and these have always made up a large part of our content. Is the clips from high schools, is the clips from middle school games. All of those stuff have always made up a really large percentage of the content on House of Highlights. And we really were, in that moment, uncertain about what the future would hold, about our ability to engage with our audience and stay front of mind. So, here we are, I think, I think it's almost a little over a month since when the NBA season went on pause, and a lot of other sports really just kind of went on pause as well. And what's been interesting to see is that not only have we not declined in terms of engagement and audience growth, we've actually accelerated our engagement and audience growth. So for us, we've increased our Instagram followers per day by 30%. We've increased our engagement rate from about like 1.5 to 2% on Instagram. We've grown our TikTok tremendously. Our TikTok went from about 2,000 new followers a day to over 25,000 followers a day. So what we really were surprised to see is that even without live sports, which has traditionally been, and live sports highlights, the core value of House of Highlights, we've managed to do really, really well through this. And I think a big part of it is a couple of things. So I think one element of it, and a media company is different than what you guys do day in and day out. They're just fundamental things that are very different in our reality than your reality. But I think there are still some really core principles that apply for us that would apply for you. And I think top among them is how can we find and provide value to our audience, to our consumers. And I think that's going to apply for you guys. It's going to apply for us. It's applying for every single person there is right now. And what our value has changed. Our value was primarily providing highlights from live sports games. And now what our value has done is it's pivoted to really be highlights from the human experience. So what you're seeing from us right now is a lot more things of, one, what people are doing around the house. We did a challenge and had Trae Young participate where he's throwing socks into his laundry basket, right? And that's a great reflection of what people are doing at home and celebrating that. I think, to what Jess said earlier about a brand, our brand has always been, has had a couple of things that we've tried to say about it. One, what we look to do is reflect and amplify sports and youth culture. That's our mission, right? And we've always been very, very clear about that. And we've always had pillars that underlie that. So our pillars being celebratory, being relatable, and being inclusive. And those things applied really well when we had live sports, but they also hold us up really well during this particular moment. So we're able to find and shift to what the sports and youth culture is at this particular moment. And it changes on a day in and day out basis, which is really, really interesting. But, I think really being able to say like youth culture has shifted more towards TikTok as everybody's home on their phone. How do we cater to that audience? How do we reflect and amplify that? And TikTok's now made up a big part of our audience. People doing kind and really encouraging things with their family, with their friends, that's stuff that's now been taken forefront. How do we reflect and amplify that on our account? And how do we continue to provide new and engaging value to our audience? And at the core, House of Highlights, a lot of things that we're trying to do, we're trying to bring people together through sports, and that's something very similar to what you guys do. But we're also trying to provide a nice moment of distraction, right? As you go through your day, as you're scrolling TikTok, as you're, going on YouTube, as you're going through Instagram, how could we provide a moment that provides value during anybody's day that's stuck at home right now? And I think if you try as best as you can to ask yourself that question, to push and challenge yourself, to understand what is the new value that we can provide, that's a really good exercise to go through.
Yeah, it's funny. I was with my father-in-law last night at dinner, and I was trying to explain what I was doing today, and I showed him, I pulled up House of Highlights on Instagram, and he just grabbed my phone and was clicking through, and he was watching one guy jump between like aisles in the supermarket, which is a pretty funny clip, or people jumping across like what seems like a driveway as like their own company. So it's fascinating where you are really capturing the human experience and engaging them. Doug, I'm going to pose a strategic and a tactical question to you. One strategic, you understand the world of these youth and local sports organizations, right? You get it because you surface that content. You've spoken to these audiences before. If you're them, sports has stopped, and they're saying to themselves, "Oh man, I got to pay attention to this social media thing." What's your advice for them? How do they start to think about their strategy where they start to develop a voice or a focus where most organizations probably haven't done that?
Yeah. So I think one thing is before you guys, can jump in and go about it is just to take some time and understand those platforms to the best of your ability. When I first started for House first started with House of Highlights and in particular Instagram, I just immersed myself in those platforms to an unbelievable degree, to where my wife's like, it's unhealthy how much time you're spending on Instagram and TikTok. But I was really, important because I wanted to put myself in the shoes of the audience, right? I wanted to consume the content as if I was, our target audience being a 13 to 24-year-old, male in particular. What is that audience consuming? I tried to follow their accounts. I tried to live that experience and really tried to be, as much as I could, an expert in that platform and understand the trends and the things that do and don't work. I think it's hard when you're, all of a sudden now you want to parachute in and be on TikTok or parachute in and be on Instagram Live or be on Twitch. And I think what's important is to really just study those platforms first, right? And try to get as best as you can, talk to other people, see what works and what doesn't work, and get your own sense and feel for, what content do you feel engaging? What do you think would be engaging to your particular audience? I think once you've kind of understand the basics of the platform, what feels engaging and what feels like it's not going to work as well, is be experimental. I mean, we still do this with our team every now and again. And we still do this with our team, I would say more than every now and again. We do this every day. And I think, you don't know what works or what fails until you do it. And I think there's a tendency to kind of be reluctant. And what I've said in other talks before, and I think it's resonated pretty well, is to be successful, particularly on social and engaging with your brand, you have to be a ruthless experimenter. You have to be willing to try things and fail and do it again and try it and fail and do it again until you ultimately stumble onto something that really works and resonates with your consumer base. So I think that's a really, really critical thing to constantly be thinking about is, what can we be trying out? Go in with a hypothesis, see if it works, if it resonates, what the feedback is, and just continue to evolve and iterate it, right? Like I've seen a lot of things on Instagram Live in the training space. And those, you see them once and you kind of get it, but then, I don't know, sometimes it's hard to be engaging throughout that experience. And the question that when we're experimenting with like Instagram Live, for example, is a consumer, you have to engage them not only like YouTube is like a 5-minute, 10-minute. On Instagram Live, you're trying to get a consumer in for every 1 second of that experience. So how are you creating an experience where it's not passive, where it's not just somebody kind of watching somebody do something? How are you creating it where it's more interactive, it's more, it's more engaging, right? So like maybe you could do something where we talked about for our team is we're doing these one-on-one interviews, and we just thought people not sticking on it, right? But can we do something that involves a more dynamic element, right? If you're giving kids a basketball drill, can you actually say, all right, hold your phone while you look at it straight at me and dribble, or can you go up the stairs and dribble? Can you do this and do that? And it becomes something that's a little bit more sticky. And I think that's part of just the experimentation phase that I would encourage everybody. So it's like when you strategize, have an idea of what you want to do, but then be able to have tactical implementation through exact experiments.
Jess, you were going to add on to that?
Yeah, I am. I think so. A couple of things. One, I love your mission statement because I think it's incredible. I was like clapping. Reflecting and amplifying sports through youth culture is like amazing, awesome, simple. But on the experimentation in social media, anybody, right? Some of you guys serve young people, like that sort of youth sports. Like you have a literally captive audience of people who know how to do this right now. Anybody who's quarantined with a teenager, get them to show you how Instagram stories works. Like there has never been a sort of better moment to lean on your kids and your constituents. Like you don't have to like develop this stuff in a vacuum. So we've got, I think there is an idea. One of the great sort of baton passes in marketing in the last few years is from like basically a bunch of kind of people sitting in a room making decisions to like a bunch of kids, honestly, who understand how these platforms work better than anybody else. So if you have access to a teenager, ask them to help you. And like that, you don't have to like develop it and then in a vacuum and then just hope that it works. There's people
right, and they can't go anywhere and they need your food. So I feel like in that sense, you could put them to work with you and ask them to be part of this. So I do think it's such a good point where you're enlisting the audience and creating this. And one of the things I was talking about back in November, I remember at NextUp, we did a whole session on this, is designing for youth. And if you look at esports, and I did an interesting interview last week with the chief operating officer element of the Super Gaming League. Esports, what is esports? Esports is video games combined with sports, right? The difference is there's no parents around. kids are running the whole thing because no one can figure out what's going on. So it's kids have made this engaging, right? It's everything that they like about this. And so I think in many respects, youth sports is going to be challenged and have an opportunity to think about what that engagement looks like, and that kids are going to have a bigger and bigger voice in the story they tell about your organization. So I think there's an opportunity to enlist them, and I think that's also an important strategic opportunity as well. And I just think about the norms that are shifting right now around engaging on digital platforms. So one of the things we've been seeing is when the idea of local sports organizations and some of our customers wanting to hop on Zoom calls to talk to each other, that would seem crazy to me like 4 or 5 months ago. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, we meet at a bar, we have drinks, like we'll take them out for lunch. But it's like, no, the norms are shifting in terms of what people are willing to do. And so if you do this right, you can really establish those norms and those channels within your organization. I mean, the idea of I was listening to with DJ Nice about we hung out his like DJ parties, quarantine parties, and the idea of going to a party on Instagram Live and watching a DJ shout out people and everything else was surreal. And at the same time, it's like the future, right? So if you understand that, you start to say, oh, wow, I'm experiencing this. To Doug's point, how is this relevant back to my own strategy and theory? I'm going to bring David into this conversation. I know there's some questions that are flowing in that I'm seeing. So again, feel free. We have some of the top experts in the world on this. So we're excited. David, as you listen to this, you've been a marketing executive across literally the who's who of organizations, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Major League Baseball, Olympics, Fanatics, and of course, Augusta Sportswear. And I can't say enough about the team down there. As you've confronted this as a brand who has to put this stuff into action, and you're shut down in the sense that people aren't ordering uniforms the same way, how are you approaching this?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've had to change how we think about daily work. We've had to look inward and figure out, okay, how do we want to come out of this period? What do we want to be stronger? And at the same time, to Jess's point, you can't be too inward looking because you've got a lot of customers out there that do want to hear from you, and you have to have a message. And what is your message going to be to those customers? And it has to be relevant at this time. I think we've struggled with inwardly. What do we want to focus our message around? What are the things that we don't want to say that we normally would? Because I think a lot of brands right now are struggling with trying to say too much, or they want to be talking about themselves versus what we're all going through. And the brands that are talking about what we're all going through together in a meaningful way that connects to what they do and what they're all about, that's where you want to be. That's the space I think you want to be in. So, but back to your question about, so what are we doing differently? So we are tailoring a lot of messaging towards our customers in terms of what we can offer them during this time period, and doing some give back programs, partnering with the Red Cross on some apparel pieces. But we're also targeting some things that we want to improve. So I think organizations can look at themselves and say, hey, what are the things that we need to improve website-wise, staffing-wise, and really look inward to take this time and say, and put some processes, put some things in place so when we do come out of this, that those weaknesses are now strengths. And I think that, the other thing is being consistent in your communication and your connection. I think Jess had some great ideas around, the simplicity of really good brand strategy or brand message, core brand message, and mission is so simple and typically one line. Ours is supporting healthy families and building and supporting families to build healthy communities through sport. And we're certainly not, we're not, Augusta Sportswear Brands is not Nike or Adidas or Under Armour. We play a unique role in supporting those families with high quality sports uniforms and equipment for leagues that do have price points and do have certain thresholds budget wise, but still want, great looking sublimated uniforms, or great looking warm-ups or tees or whatever it is. And so, as we look inward and we stay focused on what that mission is, how can we help people during this time period? And
yeah.
I think the consistency of message is really important. So I think it could be daunting for youth organizations, sports organizations of any kind, as we talk about it, to be like, wow, where do I begin? Okay, I want to relook at my strategy. And it's really, if you boil it down to what Jess was saying, it's really not that hard. And test it with some people. And then social media, it feels overwhelming, but I think Doug broke it down really well. And hey, try things, get out there and try a story. And there's probably parents or even players in your association that have a level of expertise that you can tap into. And then connect that through to tactically, how do you want to touch people? So in the apparel space, how do you take what your social message is and your brand strategy and connect it to a digital store where you're offering products, tees and hats and uniforms and whatnot that are the billboard of your brand in the community? And how do you do that in a way that's really compelling, easy, modern, fun, and then the apparel itself says what you wanted to say about your brand.
Yeah. Let's please, Jess, go ahead.
Sorry, I keep you guys. It's hard. This is the hard format. As somebody who gets excited by things that other people say, this is a tough thing to do. But the thing that I've realized, actually, as you guys are talking, and we've used these kind of formula before, but like I now have a visual aid. Quickest way to get to your brand strategy is something that looks like that. We do this for these people by doing this. And like, so your purpose, David, around supporting families is a very specific target audience. So we, develop the minds and bodies of young people by giving them access to soccer and other training tools or something like that. This is a pretty like quick shorthand to get to it. But yeah, and you can also see, sorry, this is like the fun of work from home. The other piece of paper I have here is my daughter's artwork. So there's we're sort of improvising, but yeah, I think it's really interesting noting you guys have a really great advantage right now, because I keep coming back to this, who your community is, you really know, and like your brand is always about serving your community in some way. So Doug's is about youth culture and like basically really kind of bringing that forward. David is about families and like families who are engaging through sport. So knowing who you serve is like, it's such a kind of leapfrog into a sort of much better action plan, not only for this point in time but also moving forward.
Yeah, I would even say,
so go ahead, Doug, please.
just narrowing your brand down to one word. Can you narrow it down to one word? At Coca-Cola, it was happiness. So if we develop creative that didn't instill some form of happiness, it was off strategy. And so that's something to consider for organizations. What is that? If you could distill it even from a sentence or a bullet down to one word, it's a nice test to try to get to.
Doug, you were gonna say something. Thank you, David.
Yeah, there's something that David touched upon that I really liked, and I wanted to just kind of follow up on, which is that emphasis on focus, right? I think now more so than ever, everybody's home, and you don't have that same structure that you normally do. And your teams and everybody has ideas of ways in which they want to run this way, this person wants to run the other way. And it's really hard at times to just kind of narrow in, lock in, and be disciplined and say, there's 50 different things that we could be doing, but what is it that we're really going to focus on? What are the things that really matter, and what are the things that could really be impactful? And I think what you guys, on this call, House of Pilots can speak to people on a very broad scale. We have, Jeremy alluded to, the followers that we have, but what you guys have is often a lot more valuable, because you could talk to people on an individual level, right? Your consumer space, their smile, their laugh, you know them, right? And I think that's a real opportunity that you guys have, is just to be able to make really human and personal connections with people, right? We could talk all day about, social media and TikTok and Instagram, but you guys are really just socially engaged with these people on a very real level, whether it's just texting or, sending an email or, just jumping on a Zoom with a kid that's really important or going through a hard time, right? I think we tend to think about social media in the biggest possible way on these massive platforms, but social connection is the same. And I think, you guys don't always have to tap into Instagram and Twitter and and TikTok and whatever comes next. You guys have that amazing advantage just to deal with people on a really personal level and be them, whether it's a Zoom or it's a text or it's an email, like I said, and just make those really intimate connections. I think that's what people will value both now and in the long run, right? If people know that you're going through it too, that this is tough for you, it's tough for everybody, and I think they appreciate that honesty and that realness and the fact that, hey, when things were good, they were there, and when things are tough, they were just there for us as well. And I think your consumers will really value that.
Yeah, I love the conversation, and I just think about, if as an organization, the first thing, if it starts with, you mentioned, David, this idea of the one word, right, and happiness for Coca-Cola is the example. Jess, you've talked about the ability of simplifying and even giving us a formula for that. If you're not able to speak at that level, if all you are is saying, hey, I run basketball programs or soccer programs, and that's what we're about, then what the thing I would tell you is that you are already missing an opportunity to differentiate yourself. You're already if that was the value proposition you had, there's so many other organizations that have the same value proposition of coaching a soccer organization or coaching baseball, whatever it may be. So your ability to speak at a higher level gives you the opportunity to differentiate yourself and gives you opportunities to live that in all kinds of interesting creative ways, whether that's digitally, whether that's through programs, whether that's through volunteering, because you can bring that to life. And so I think this is an invitation for organizations to really make sure that they're defining that higher level purpose that again will be relevant whether sports exists or not. Let me pose a question to the group, because this is a challenge, and we're getting these questions that are coming in. Organizations right now have a dynamic where there's some parents have paid for their programs, and there's a question of and they don't even have money to give refunds. Parents want refunds. They don't know if the games are going to cancel. So there's all this uncertainty. There's the financial reality of these organizations where they're facing furloughs and layoffs and everything else. And at the same time, they have families that are hurting that also needs resources. So they got this complicated challenge as they think about how they present themselves with this idea of like how they're dealing with the economic dynamics based on the kind of existential circumstances they're in. And so what organizations are often wondering is like, how do they, when they think about trying to make this decision around what to do about refunds or credits or dealing with people that have paid but want services, and they don't know when they're going to come back. A lot of that comes down to what it is you stand for and how you're telling that story or explaining that. Because if you're just on the receiving end of those kinds of requests, it seems like you're already behind. So maybe I'll go to Jess and David initially on this, which is like, how do you think about, when you think about brand and positioning, how can that help you answer a question of what to do in a situation like this, where you're dealing with like very tactical policy questions, but that actually probably are a larger question of what it is you stand for as an organization and how you're relating to it. So I'm curious to know, because this is something that a lot of organizations are struggling with right now.
Yeah, and it, don't get me wrong, this is hard. Like everybody's in a kind of hard spot right now. I think the thing that I would say is there is a difference between money and value. So people have paid you for one set of services, but the goal right now, what they want is to get a certain value out of that money that they've given you. So if the value that you provide is basically getting the teenagers off the sofa while they're stuck at home, providing in-home drills, setting up weekly video chats so the teams can talk to each other, just whatever ways that you find to add value during this period will soften. It might not make them go away, but will soften those requests for people getting their money back. And I think it's, if you think about the thing that you provide as like not a sort of transactional thing, but like a much more kind of like embedded set of services and values that you can execute at this point in time, then it gets easier. And the other thing that I would say to keep in mind as you go through this, and it should be part of your messaging as you have these conversations with people, is when you come through this, demand for your product is never going to be higher. Like it really isn't. You're gonna, we don't know when it's gonna be, but when people are allowed outside and they're allowed to exercise, there's gonna all of a sudden be this kind of like surge in need, desire for not just like physical activity, but human connection, like all of that stuff now. So the things that you do now to offer human connection and physical activity are things that you can continue to scale over time. So the stories that you're telling now are stories that you will continue to tell over time. So try and shift towards, like, the fundamental shift I would say is like try and find ways to demonstrate the value that you provide outside of the things that you were doing before this.
Yeah, and I love this idea that if you have that higher level conversation, if the value proposition is simply we help play soccer games on a field, if there's no soccer games on a field, it's hard to be able to articulate ongoing value. If that value is a higher level purpose around community, around leadership and character development, through sport and what that in the community you're building around the organization, then you're in a position to represent and deliver that value in lots of other ways. And you might face like an exigent question of like refunds tomorrow that may be hard for that positioning. But if you get this positioning right and use this time right, as Jess said, I think you're going to be able to meet that demand and differentiate yourself.
Yeah, and sorry, just to build on that 1 second, I think it's so interesting to me. Sport has never just been about what happens on the field, like ever. It's about community, it's about identity, it's about physicality, it's about like self-confidence, it's about culture, it's about like all of these different things. And I think, it's been so interesting over the last, sorry to go back to this again, it's just a useful example, but like, Colin Kaepernick was not playing any on-field football when he became a massive part of the sport dialogue. You don't have to be, it's not about, it's so much bigger and broader than that. And I feel like we make it so small by making it just what happens on the field. Obviously there's like economics associated with that, and like that's, the sort of service you provide. But if you think about your offering as being what sport was always about, so community, identity, confidence, all of those things, then you can like add extraordinary amounts of value even when the sport isn't happening.
Yeah.
David,
how do you approach that situation?
Well, I just wanted to build on that a little bit. We have a campaign called Connected by Team, and it's about the fact that when you're on a team, whether it's your 7-year-old flag football team, your high school wrestling team, or adult league, church basketball, you're connected for life by that team. So when we think about the teams as adults that we were on as kids, you flash to memories of not necessarily winning and losing. It's moments with building friendship, lifelong friendships, right? Or we maybe haven't seen in 20 years, but you just have that memory in the dugout with Crazy Daryl who blew the biggest bubble. So that connection, what Jess is talking about, I think is right. It's about connecting, and whether it's Zoom or GoTo, there's this technology enabled opportunity for leagues to connect parents and players and sponsors and anybody, any group they really want to connect, to not necessarily talk about the season and what that might look like, but just to get kids together who might have been on a team or in the same league to talk and vent, and what are they feeling, what are they going through, and what an opportunity for a league to be the enabler of that, to be the enabler of getting a group of 12-year-old girls together that play volleyball that can't play, to talk about their feelings, and to vent and just let it all out. And that's massive. I mean, because then you're to Jess's point, it's not about sport anymore. It's about people and how they connect and how they can't connect right now, but when they do, boy, they're going to remember those crazy Zoom calls we had, guys, when we got together and we shared stories, and so I think that's just a huge opportunity and something that the community will remember who did that.
Yeah, Doug, one of the things I think a lot of organizations are trying to think about is, how to use digital platforms to create engagement, right? Because and whether that's the way you think about social media platforms, or even if it's Zoom, if they're and you gave that example of walking up the stairs, dribbling a basketball, which is a good thought, but I think a lot of organizations are trying to figure out how to respond and deliver programming or value digitally, and part of that is how you keep people's attention. Because if the kids are if they're having to go to school online, they're not all engaged for that. And then they're probably waiting back is where they can get back to Fortnite, House of Highlights feed, or something when they want to watch on Netflix. So when you're competing with that, what is the answer? How do you think about designing for engagement, and what does that look like, especially as they're thinking how to adapt their programs and the value that they're delivering? I think you're muted, Doug. Sorry.
All right. Yeah, it's such a great question, and it is so tough because you're right. Like, you're not only competing, we say this all the time with House of Highlights, we're not just competing against Sports Center or, Complex, we're competing against Netflix and Fortnite and, Valorant everything that it could potentially be doing at this particular moment in time. And it really is a constant challenge to figure out how do you be engaging? How do you just keep people involved in whatever you're doing? And I don't know, it's tough. I mean, I think here's one where I'll probably take like my House of Highlights hat off for a little bit and put my like dad hat on. Like, I think just getting really creative, you know, like in terms of figuring out what are things that are different than the routine that you've done or have done. Like for like, you know, our team, like it's been a struggle when we're just doing the same type of hangouts that we always do, right? But I think what we've tried to do is we've tried to institute like trivia games as part of it. And it's just like, that's a lot more engaging and fun than, you know, the standard, hey, 1 o'clock, we're gonna go over what everybody's working on, right? And, you know, I think about for my own kids, like every time they get on the Zoom, like one's running off in this direction, the other's running off in that direction. And then like my brother-in-law suggested we do a scavenger hunt Zoom where they had to go around the house and find things and bring it back. And they were like so hyper engaged with that and they loved it and they couldn't wait to do it again. My daughter does cheer and their cheerleaders, their cheer coach has just been really, really creative about finding different ways of making the Zoom, whether it's, you know, bringing in different coaches and doing, you know, different routines that they would have never done before, or having them pass things around, like, and get creative with, you know, the things around their house. I think it's just a challenge, just a challenge in terms of being creative and coming up with things that are new and different than what you normally would do, right? A traditional basketball practice may not work as well, you know, when everybody's in the house, but maybe there's, you know, different ways of looking at it and conceptualizing what would be a fun, entertaining thing to do for somebody in their bedroom and thinking about it in that context. So I think it's just really a matter of, you know, pushing the creative boundaries and really trying to put yourself in the shoes of that kid in their bedroom that's been stuck at home all day.
Yeah, one of the things that just occurred to me is, you know, if you think about a basketball team that may get together to break down film, instead of, you don't have games to break down film, maybe you like watch Hoosiers as a team and then you break down the actual scenes and be like, all right, what do you think of the play that Gene Hackman's running here? Like, what does it look like? Otherwise, maybe kids today don't even watch the Hoosiers. But it's so I think, you know, one thing before I leave this question on the kind of difference. We're getting some questions now about that there's so many organizations that are out there and they're trying to figure out what's a unique differential advantage for them, because I think the example that's coming in is they're based in New Jersey and there's so many organizations in a small period of time. So the way that they've been approaching this is to try to show success stories of like athletes getting recruited and how their team is performing. So they've had that on their website. Again, one of the hard part is that other organizations are often claiming that their athletes are getting recorded or they're showing their trophies out, even if the tournaments aren't as good. And as a parent, it's hard to discriminate between like, wait a second, I don't know if they're all saying they have first place finishes. That doesn't seem like everyone could get first, but how do I know? So what is the way to, you know, and I'll throw it to you, Jess, first, like, how do they differentiate themselves? And I think it really builds on a lot of things we've been talking about in a practical way for them to think about it, because in a lot of cases, a lot of the ways they've tried to differentiate them is the fact that they're producing more successful athletes. And I think the question is there a way of elevating that conversation at all to create like more of a unique advantage when it seems like everybody offers soccer or baseball or basketball and lacrosse in their area?
Yeah, I think that's so. I mean, this is an existential question. Like every brand faces this. This is why Tigers ended up on cereal packets. There's the thing that I think is interesting here is there are always unmet needs. So basically, if you're a parent putting your kid in a soccer program, having your kid recruited into a sort of pro-am league or whatever it is that they're getting recruited into is going to be one of your definitions of success. It's going to be one of your things. If you become the league that also basically takes the best care of the athletes, we take care of like mental health and physical health as well as getting people recruited. Like they're not just going to go through this kind of process and end up in this kind of like hothouse situation. They're going to come through it like healthy human beings, like kind of we take care of mind and body. That's a differentiator. Physical safety, if you're doing other kinds of football, obviously like we prioritize not just like skill but safety. That's another thing. So what are the unmet needs of your audience that you can like sort of add in there? And if everybody's doing the same thing, people are complex and like multifaceted. So just that, like, I want my kid to be in the major leagues is like, that's just one of the things, like one of the reasons that you put your kid in soccer, or we teach our like focus is very, very specifically on teaching kids like respect through sport, or like community through sport, or whatever it is. There's like a number of different things that parents or any of your stakeholders would want that aren't being met right now. So if you have the same message as everybody else, then that can either be a challenge, or it can just mean that everybody else is missing a trick, and you're gonna do it better by knowing your community better. So I think the interesting thing, and like Doug was saying some stuff around this as well, is like put yourself in the mindset of your audience and your community, and think, right, okay, why really are they sending their kids to us? Why really are they playing with us? And then what are they getting out of it? And then highlight those qualities as well as the ones that everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I like that, and I think it's almost thinking also about the actions that manifest that. So if you say that we're about respect and we stand for it, then what are the ways you do that? Well, maybe it's we bring in guest speakers. Maybe we have a book club, and you watch and read these books over the specific times. You know, maybe that we're teaching people how to be respectful on social media, and we bring in a speaker to talk about like respect that goes beyond the field, but how you're carrying yourself a certain way. You know, so I think it's interesting to think about, if you're standing for these things, you should be able to come up with all these different ways that differentiate what you're doing. And then that goes back to the value proposition, back tied to refunds and everything else, because you're then creating a broader mechanism by which you're delivering these things than purely whether or not you win and lose, because you can't control if your kids get recruited, and you can't control if you win or lose the games. So that is the whole value that you're attaching yourself to. It's out of your control. I'm going to propose one final question and look for some quick answers on this one, which is, as Jess, you mentioned, sports is going to come back. But there's a question of how parents are going to feel about this, right? We're going to live in this world, and I don't think it's a light switch, which is, as much as I'm ready to get my kids out the door, there's this question of safety and what's going on. And so when it comes to kind of messaging, engagement, marketing in an environment where you're trying to get parents to re-engage in your organization or sign up again, but there's still this overhang of what's going on, how do you think about going about doing that? I'll throw it to Doug and then David. Doug, what's your take on that positioning on, you know, in the nature of how this is coming back? You know, how you kind of manage that or navigate that as an organization from a marketing perspective?
I think it's just about being honest and transparent and trying to reflect back as much as possible, you know, people's trepidation, right? I think in this particular moment, a lot of the parents' fears are just going to be, is my kid going to be safe? You know, is this going to, you know, endanger my friends or family if, you know, my kids, you know, how those things happen? I think what's really important, you know, from you know, any organization is just about being as honest and transparent about what they're walking into, all the steps that, you know, they can expect, and just having that level of over communication and putting, you know, people's questions and their concerns at ease to the best of your ability. You know, as a parent myself, that's the thing that, you know, I think my wife and I, when we think about our kids getting back to school or sports, is the number one question is the safety of, you know, both, you know, our kids, our families, and, you know, other people that we may interact with as the burden eases. And I think just trying as best as you can to reassure people of what, you know, that you're taking every precaution and that their health and safety comes first. And I think that's the most important thing for people to communicate at this particular moment.
David, what's your take? What's the way to how people might think about positioning themselves, especially in an uncertain environment as we come back?
I don't know if you guys can hear me.
We got you.
Okay. I lost you there for a few seconds. Jeremy, I lost your question, but just to build on what Doug said, I think from the leagues that we've talked to, they're asking for help in a myriad of ways: sports wipes, sprays that we can supply that we've never supplied before, thermometers. I think that you have to think through the total experience and get parents comfortable with the new reality of what we're going to face when we do come back, and the social distancing in a gym or a field, what that looks like, wiping down balls every so often. It's got to be thought through in a very detailed, complete way, and then that communication's got to be shared out to get parents as comfortable as they can with what that new sports world looks like for kids.
Jess, final word on safety. How to think about messaging in the context of that.
Yeah, I think David's point about the fact that safety is a sort of a thing that there are tangible actions you can take to demonstrate it. So like, and I would say just a couple of builds there is, one, don't be pressured to come back before you're ready. Because if you want to make a statement about the fact that you are the league that cares the most about the people in it, then like basically saying that we're not ready yet. Like you look at the sort of relationship that New Yorkers have right now with Andrew Cuomo, who is refusing to put people at risk. Like there's a sort of intense series of both man and normal crushes happening on Andrew Cuomo right now, just because he's said we're going to be the state that cares the most. We care about our people. And I think that to me is really important. And like it takes lots and lots of different forms. So when you come back, how you sanitize the equipment, like the testing that you know, like once we have access to tests, that can be part of your program as well. Just making sure that there's going to be regular testing of people to make sure it's not spreading. That's, you know, something you can do as well. And the other thing that I would say is people only get unhappy when they don't hear things. Over communication is really, really important. This is one of the things that we found in like I find in my job like all the time is like if you don't say anything, people fill in gaps for themselves. So it's totally okay to come out and say, look, we don't know when we're going to be back. Here are things we're doing in the meantime, or like we're cautiously optimistic that it might be this month, but it's still, you know, we'll let you know and keep you posted. What isn't okay is to not say anything at all, because that's when people start getting sort of confused, hurt, frightened, angry, and asking for their money back, basically. So I would say over communicate from now, and then just keep that going as you go, because that will help people a lot.
Yeah, as I listen to you all, and it's been such an inspiring chat, I think what's powerful to think about is you don't have to invent why your organization means something more than just what happens on the field, because that is what sports is about, right? That is the connection that people feel. You just have to figure out how to access that story and tell that, and then manifest that self in through all the different ways that you do it. And it's not just through the story, it's through the actions. It's not just through the social media, it's through the actual engagement that you're having. So I think there's such an opportunity to do that. And if you really kind of discover who it is you are and what you're standing for, then that's going to guide every action, right? You're going to be proactive in how you communicate, because you're going to know what you stand for and talk about whether it's refunds or when we're returning or your safety protocols and everything else. So I think it's such a great reminder. And I want to thank Doug and David and Jess for providing such great ideas for this group. And I know we're eager to kind of help continue to spread that. So thank you for doing your part as part of Sports Comeback. One of the things that was interesting from that survey I did from the very beginning is over 75% of organizations are not in a position to access the funding that's coming from governments. You hear about all these small businesses that are being hurt, that are trying to figure out what to do, or nonprofit organizations, and the pain of these organizations are real, but so is the opportunity, and you're going to help lead this kind of comeback, and we're glad to be part of that. So thank you all for joining today. Take a look out at the blog.leagueapps.com for kind of a summary of today's conversation and access recording. You can also join our industry Slack group, which we'll post into the chat tools, and also in a follow-up email that you can continue the conversation with others and share best practices on brand and marketing. And have a great day, everybody. We appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you back out on the field and the courts. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.